I'm Kristen Kelleher, the Manager of Community Relations, and we have over 375 people joining us virtually here tonight. We're going to have a presentation shortly, and then after the presentation, we've reserved quite a bit of time for a Q&A session. We're going to work within that time to answer as many questions as we can. In order to do so, at the bottom of your screen, there's a Q&A button right at the center. We suggest that you please wait until after the presentation to begin entering your questions. We truly believe your questions will likely be answered throughout the presentation tonight. When it does come time, we'll go over this again, but if you could keep your questions as concise as possible, it will make it a little bit easier for us to get through as many as possible. We're really excited for you to meet our team and give you the answers that you've all been really patiently waiting for since we last met. I'm going to now hand it over to Kathy Watkins, our Deputy City Manager.
Hello, if you could go to the agenda screen, Kristen. Thank you. So again, welcome everyone. I know we've had a number of meetings about the demolition of 221 Mount Auburn Street. We are really excited tonight to show sort of what's coming forward. We're going to do a little bit of a quick overview and some background slides, some of which of information people have likely seen numerous times, but we just want to go through and make sure we all have some baseline information. Then we're going to spend a really significant part of the meeting focusing on meeting the team, introducing you to the folks that are going to be overseeing and conducting the demolition, and really dig into the demolition approach and timeline, as well as talk about the oversight and monitoring, like how are we continuing to ensure public health and public safety. I think that's one of the themes that, as we've been talking about this project, really from the beginning when the city became involved, the focus has been on really protecting public health and safety. And then we'll do Q&A at the save time at the end. So with that, I'll talk a little bit about just the oversight of the location. So an overview of the location. So we're talking about the Riverview property. So as you see it on the screen, Mount Auburn Street is at the bottom of the screen, and to the left is Spark Street. The yellow star represents the building 221 Mount Auburn Street, which is the 9-story concrete structure with about 66 units. That's the focus of all of these discussions. The parcel also contains a separate building known as the Bradbury Building that has about 14 units. That's a 3-story wood and brick building, and so does not have the same construction or issues of the primary 221 Mount Auburn Street building. So again, while it's part of the property and part of the Riverview Condominiums, it is not part of the focus of the demolition. So again, we go back to, there's been a lot of history. We've had a lot of previous meetings. I would encourage folks to go back to the July 24th meeting that we had for, if you really want to dig into some of the history of the structural issues on site. That meeting is recorded and has been posted onto the website. But the high level overview is that, the owners of 221 Mount Auburn Street were doing preventative maintenance, doing work on the building, really being responsible owners and stewards of their building. And while they were doing that, they were doing some roof work and some drainage improvements, and they did new cores in the balconies and found a number of conditions that did not match what they were expecting. And so they worked with SGH, and we'll talk a little bit more about SGH, but really worked with SGH to identify and evaluate the overall building. And they found a number of different issues, most of which really began with during the construction of the building back in the 60s. And so they found that the steel reinforcement wasn't where they were expecting it, and then low compressive strength of the concrete. And that was really found throughout the building. And so that sort of started this process of what does that mean and what do we do about the building? One of the things that we've talked a little bit about this in the past, there's some additional information here. We know that the building has asbestos in the building, as typical of buildings throughout the city and really across the country and the world. So asbestos is a naturally occurring mineral. It has been used throughout buildings due to its really beneficial use in terms of being fire resistant and heat resistant and very durable. It is often found in tiles and other building products. When those are in place, there's not harm from the asbestos. What we become concerned about is if asbestos becomes airborne. And so there's different types of asbestos. The type that we see in this building is really the serpentine and the chrysotile asbestos. So again, a little bit more information there. This is information, and this was work that was done from Riverview Condos, again, in previous work on the building. They did some, pre-abatement of asbestos when they were doing work on various units. This report has been posted to the website and really just identifies those locations where there's known asbestos in the building. And again, typical of what you would expect in a building of this era, is in the joint compound, is in floor tiles, and then also in mastic in the building. So again, this is really good information that we have. And TRC, who I'll talk a little bit about in a second, has done that evaluation for the building over the years when various projects have been done. So one of the things that we've been working with, and again, we talked about this more in our previous meetings, is about, the process that got the city involved. So the Riverview Condominiums associations really came to the very unfortunate decision that the building had to be demolished, given those structural issues that are found throughout the building. It was not feasible to repair the building. And so they really came to the city looking for assistance. And again, because of the impact on public health and public safety associated with a building of this size in a dense residential neighborhood, it really became incumbent upon the city to step in and play a role in the demolition of this building. So back in July, as a protective measure, we closed off some of the streets around the building to, again, protect public health and safety while we're working on this process to get the building to demolition. And then back in July, the city council appropriated $20 million to fund the demolition, understanding that once we know the final cost of the demolition, we would issue bills to the owners of the 221 Mount Auburn Street for the demolition costs. We've also been working with, how do we maintain the current situation and really minimize risk to the public while we're getting through this process of getting to demolition. And so one of the things we've been doing is doing drone surveys every 2 weeks. And so again, it's not safe to enter the building, but we are having our consultants do drone surveys where they can inspect the exterior of the building and identify if they're seeing any significant changes to the building that would indicate that something is imminently happening. To date, again, we've been doing those every 2 weeks, posting them on the website, and have not seen anything that is indicating a significant change in the building. Again, the other thing we've been really focused on and working on is pulling together this full team that is going to do the demolition work. So that's going to be really the focus of tonight's discussion. So this is sort of the overview of who all is going to be involved in the demolition. So again, the city of Cambridge, we're going to be involved, and I'll go through each one of these folks in terms of their role. Mass DEP also plays a really critical role in terms of regulatory oversight associated with any asbestos contained in buildings. We have SGH and TRC, who are really on our consultant team assisting us. And then we also have Consigli, who we've hired as the general contractor that will be leading all of the construction efforts. And then they have hired North Star to do the actual demolition. And we're going to hear a fair amount from North Star tonight to really talk through the type of projects they've done and the experience that they bring to this work. So again, I'm going to dig into a little bit about what are each of these groups doing and what's their role. So for the city, now that we're undertaking it, we will be responsible for all the consultants and the construction teams, as well as keeping the community informed. And those efforts are led, by myself as deputy city manager, and then also with our capital building projects department. So our capital buildings group manages all the design and construction of our large school and municipal buildings. And so while we're typically not involved in residential properties like we're talking about tonight, this group has a lot of experience doing significant construction. You see some images here of the Tobin School, which just opened and is an incredibly impressive building, and shows the level of detail and attention that group puts into these kinds of projects. On the right is an image of Vale Court. This is a smaller building, but was done through a non-traditional work plan, which we'll talk a little bit more about what that means. But it was demolished with asbestos in the building, and the building was removed safely. And again, that work was overseen by our Capital Buildings Group. And again, these are some other images of demolitions of various projects that that group has led, really focusing on, the Tobin at Vassal Lane School and the King Open School on Cambridge Street. And again, both of those projects involve significant demolition. Mass DEP, so we've talked a little bit about this in previous meetings. Mass DEP is responsible for all permitting and regulatory authority associated with asbestos removal in buildings. And so they are a key partner in this project. The team has met with Mass DEP on 3 different occasions and had numerous calls with them to make sure that we're really collaborating and getting their input early and throughout the process. So typically, if you have a building that you're going to demolish and it has asbestos in it, you would go through and do what's known as pre-abatement. So you would go through and identify any location that has asbestos and then remove it and then demolish the building. Because of the structural concerns with this building, that's not possible. We can't have people going into the building. We can't have people going into the building and doing deconstruction. And so the building needs to be completely removed as if it's all containing asbestos containing material. So Mass DEP has a process for exactly that situation. And it's known as a non-traditional work plan. And so that's why we're really dealing very closely with Mass DEP, and they play a really important role in this work. The other sort of state agency that is involved with this is the Department of Labor Standards. So you'll see them throughout this Mass DLS. And they issue the licensing for people that are, approved to work in and around asbestos. And so they are also an important part of this process. So we talk again about a non-traditional work plan. One of the first, when the process of a non-traditional work plan identifies this exact kind of situation where it's not safe to go into the building to do it. And so then again, it falls into this category. A couple of the key steps that I think, people have asked a lot about what's Mass DEP's role. So again, they will be reviewing and approving the plan. They will also be doing a site visit and doing a pre-construction inspection, making sure that all the safety protocols are in place before demolition begins. They will also be coming out periodically and they were very clear about unannounced inspections. So this isn't that the contractor knows that, they're coming Wednesday afternoon at 2. They really are doing periodic unannounced inspections to check on the work, see that things are set up as specified in the plan. And then at the end, before the site project is considered complete, Mass DEP also comes out and does a final inspection. So SGH is an extremely large national engineering firm. They are very well known for their work in demolition projects, for their work on structural concrete projects. We talked about them a little bit. They were involved very early on with the Riverview Condominium Associations when they identified that they had an issue. So SGH is very familiar with the building. The city has hired SGH to be the engineer of record for this project. So they will be advising the city as well as reviewing all of the engineering and demolition plans on behalf of the city. And that is work that they have done, throughout the country and have a lot of experience with that. The other sort of consulting firm that we have on the team is TRC. And again, we talked about them a little bit earlier. They've been involved in this building, done some asbestos testing, so they are familiar with this site. They also have a lot of experience with non-traditional work plans, working with Mass DEP. They've done projects with MIT, Harvard, Kendall Square Google building, and really Brigham and Women's Hospital, and really very large demolition projects throughout the area. And they have the largest group of Massachusetts licensed asbestos professional staff in the state. And so this is the work that they do, working closely with DEP. They also have their own analytical lab where they can do the testing and preparation of the air sample, air quality samples that we'll talk about in a second. So when we get into who's going to be doing the construction and leading that work? So The city has brought on Consigli. They will be the general contractor that will really be leading all of these efforts in the field. The company really began locally in Milford and has grown to really cover throughout the Northeast and Mid-Atlantic. And again, for this project, they will be on site daily, leading the work, directing the work, having staff on site managing those efforts. The one thing, and I will say this a little bit about both Consigli, and then when we talk about the demo sub, North Star, is that when we've met with folks and went through, who are the right people for this team and who are the right people to do this work. One of the things that really stood out, both about Consigli and also North Star, is their commitment to safe work environments, protecting their own people and protecting the public. And I would say that is a theme that has really come through in all of our conversations. And I think as you hear North Star really dig into some of the details about the demolition, you will hear about safety and the seriousness with which everyone on this team takes that. So North Star, I'm going to turn it over in just a minute to Jake Versace from North Star. North Star has been brought onto the team to do the demolition work. They are an incredibly impressive organization. When we've talked to them about their projects, they have done significant, large, complicated projects, similar or more complex than the one we're talking about. And again, with a really proven track record of safety. They do abatement and demolition. It's that is the core business of what they do. And again, I'm going to turn it over to Jake Versace, who is going to run through two things. The first is really walking through a number of similar projects, because we feel like that really explains best how this work will be done and the type of equipment that they'll be using. And then we'll also go into some specifics about the demolition at 221 Mount Auburn. So I will turn it over to Jake from North Star. Thank you.
Kathy, thank you for the introduction. Good evening, everybody. My name is Jake Versace. I'm a project manager at North Star Contracting Group based out of Everett. We are looking forward to being able to work on this project. We have extensive experience with these types of constructions, be it distressed buildings, which we know, of course, is a concern with this building, be it cast in place concrete structures, which is the structural nature of this building, as well as non-traditional work plans, which we do very frequently here locally in Massachusetts. And combined, all three facets of that are, it's the type of work that we are very familiar with, especially in the local market. As we see here, we have a 17-story tower. It's a St. John Tower in Stamford, Connecticut. This is comprised of very similar construction, cast in place concrete. This features two high-reach excavators performing this demolition work. The one on the right-hand side is our 145-foot high-reach excavator. It is the very machine that will be used here at 221 Mount Auburn Street. Another highlight of this project was this is right in downtown Stamford, very close proximity to active roadways, active buildings, and highly trafficked pedestrian areas as well. This is three more photographs from that site. This is generally what we can expect to see when we're over here at 221 Mount Auburn. The photo on the left shows a stair-stepping sequence to what is often found in high-reach demolition. We will not see that at 221 Mount Auburn due to some of the structural concerns. We will see more what is shown in the middle picture. That's depicting the height being a uniform, the structure being a uniform bay, the full height. And if you look at the photo on the right, that is what we can expect to see towards the end of the demolition, where we've got a pile of demolition debris being actively loaded and removed from the site. We're going to highlight a project here locally in downtown Boston. We have one post office square where we were tasked with a 41-story facade removal job, as well as the demolition of an 11-story parking garage, not to be confused with the government center garage around the corner. This was the garage associated with Post Office Square. Very similar construction, cast in place concrete, and of course, very, very similar constraints. We were often feet, if not inches away from occupied spaces, buildings, underground utilities, transit, and a lot of public open space. Some more photographs from the one post office square job. Again, we have the 145-foot high reach shown in the left and the middle photographs. One on the left just showing what that machine looks like so everybody can get an understanding. The one in the middle shows that at work. And on the photo on the right-hand side, we see a conventional excavator, similar in nature to the high reach. It just does not have what we call the high reach boom on it. It is not designed to work at such heights. These will be utilized when we get into demolition of the lower floors, as well as for processing and loading debris from the site. We have some slides that show some local work here in Cambridge. As we start to transition the conversation into other nuances of what we do, we have some of our dust suppression equipment shown here. You can see what we have are our highly atomized water misters. Those are state-of-the-art pieces of equipment used for dust suppression on projects of this nature and now on construction sites really throughout the country. We will also have fire hoses being utilized. In this photo, you see one of our field staff holding a fire hose. We are tasked with some different, or faced with some different challenges at Mount Auburn Street due to the structural concerns with the building. So we will not see field staff within the exclusion zone spraying water, but rather those will be supported by boom lifts or telehandlers to also get fire hoses to the working areas. Some more photographs from this same project. On the left-hand side, you can see one of those water misters operating in tandem with the high reach. The photo in the middle and on the right, I think, speak to the precision that our highly skilled and qualified operators are able to so craftily manipulate these machines to work around adjacent structures in very, very close proximity. What we see here are two steel frame shoring systems that were installed in order to salvage a historical facade of a building which we were taking down. And the operators were tasked with removing this building really as it's intertwined with all of this existing steel. And it's truly a testament to the meticulous nature in which they're able to approach this work. And here we transition on. We see another one of our high reach, very similar to the one that will be used at 221 Mount Auburn. If you look at the left-hand side of the photograph, you see the water mister, and it's evident that you can see a steady column of mist all the way from that water mister up to where the machine's attachment is working on the building. Another view of that site. This shows our high reach excavator in the middle of the page. It shows a conventional machine on both the left and the right, as well as trailers and dumpsters throughout, to give everybody a feel of an all-inclusive package of what we can see for equipment on the project. Brookline, another local project, 10 Waldo Street. This was a non-traditional work plan demolition project. This was a cast-in-place concrete structure. You see a conventional excavator performing the demolition. And on the left-hand side of the photo, a steady stream of mist and dust suppression activity. So as we begin to talk more about the demolition approach here at 221 Mount Auburn, we have a photo of the south face of the structure. A lot of activity will occur on this side of the building. And this is a great transition point into the general demolition sequence that we can expect to see. A couple more key pieces of equipment that we will deploy because, as we've seen in that picture, that south side of the building will be so visible from Memorial Drive. We have our point of contact dust suppression system, which, if everybody can see, at the very top left of where that machine is working on the building, we have our demo interface dust suppression equipment. This is a water nozzle that is affixed right to the very tip of the machine to ensure that we have a steady flow of water at the demolition interface, and we are able to tampen dust before it generates beyond the immediate working location. One more photo of our HKD blue dust cannon. They have up to 250 feet of throw with 145 square feet of coverage. They make a very, very highly atomized mist to ensure that there is a steady and consistent shroud of water over the working area. They are able to be controlled remotely and manually. They have a remote control with 1,000 feet of range that is able to provide full oscillation, tilting of the fan, the speed in which the turbine and the pumps work at, so we can dial up or dial down the flow of water as needed. This helps us in the wintertime navigate tricky conditions that we're faced, often with freezing temperatures. We are able to manually close certain valves, adjust how that water is used and applied to avoid any freezing, to make sure that we don't run into a situation where this serves as more of a ski mountain snowblower than it does a dust suppression device. We have worked historically through winters for several years with these, with no issues of freezing. And we have secondary measures that we take as far as storing of the hoses, draining down of the systems, to guarantee that overnight or in long periods of shutdown, that there will not be freezing of components and we always have functioning systems. So now back to the overall demolition approach. We see the site boundary shown here in yellow around the 221 Mount Auburn building. On the next page, we see a few very important lines. We have our exclusion zones, which are set at 42 and 21 feet. The red line is our exclusion zone that is set at 21 feet. And this is an exclusion zone in which personnel are prohibited from entering at any point due to the structural concerns posed by the building. The exclusion zone in pink is the 42 foot exclusion zone. That exclusion zone is active at all times during demolition, and the only personnel who are allowed to enter that exclusion zone are those operating from within a protected cab. So in other words, excavator operators, high reach excavator operators, or telehandler skid steer operators who are going to be used to deploy dust suppression equipment, set up hoses, elevate dust suppression equipment with the telehandlers, and assist in processing and loadout operations. The sequence will be conducted in 6 phases, 1 through 6. The balconies, the cantilevered balconies in the south side of the building being the first phase, those will be demolished in a bottom-up fashion to limit any debris loading on the floors of the balconies below. From sequence step 1, we will transition into sequence step 2, which is on the west side of the Spark Street side of the building. We have far more room over there to operate on the site due to the geometry of the streets and adjacent structures. So we are starting over there so we can create some room for the rest of our supportive and subsequent operations. Once we finish section 2, we are going to proceed over to the east side of the site onto section 3. The idea here is to complete section 3 in a timely manner, begin to shrink the exclusion zone away from the 205 Mount Auburn building to our east. Once we finish section 3, we'll come back around to the west in section 4, complete the demolition in the green section, which is section 4, and then 5 and 6 will progress in a west to east fashion, starting at the shear wall on the west side, working to the east, and that will ultimately complete the demolition.
Thanks, Jake. That was super helpful. Sorry, let me turn my fan back off. So there's a few more slides in terms of some of the demolition, what this will look like. One of the things we've gotten a lot of questions about is truck routes. Where will the trucks be going with, particularly with the construction debris? One of the things that's really helpful is because we have, Mount Auburn Street in front and that section of road is closed, we will be using that to stage the large trucks needed to remove the demolition. The trucks will enter from the Harvard Square side and then really load up at the building side and then depart towards Fresh Pond Parkway. And so I know people had asked questions about, would they be on the neighborhood streets? it'll really be the trucks will be on those major streets and really as straight a direction and logistically as straightforward as possible. As we talked about, the general debris will be treated as asbestos containing material, and that means it'll be properly managed, handled, and disposed from the building demolition all the way to the point where it goes to the landfill, which these folks at North Star and Consigli have already been working on those logistics of where the landfill is that can take this material. One of the important things to note is that this isn't material that's then loaded and then leaves on an open truck bed. So each of the trucks will have double 10 milliliter thick liners, and so you'd have two of those liners. You place the material in, and then each of those liners is closed and sealed. So you close and seal one liner, and then you close and seal the second liner, and all of that happens on site, and again with properly trained staff wearing appropriate PPE. And then in terms of the number of trucks per day, we're really estimating that it's sort of 15 trucks per day at a maximum, just in terms of the logistics of the material and getting that that material out to Ohio, which is the ultimate destination of it. People have asked a lot of sort of like what to expect during construction and demolition. I think Jake's photos that really went through those other construction projects probably provide people the most visual information and sort of the clearest information. It will obviously have significant noise. We will follow our noise ordinance. Under our noise ordinance, construction is allowed Monday to Friday, 7 to 6, and Saturday, 9 to 6. And work outside of, work outside of those hours would require a variance, which we're not expecting. We are expecting the sort of normal construction hours to be 7 to 4, Monday through Friday. But I do want to say to folks, if they're in the middle of an operation and they can work a half hour longer and get to a better stopping place, that is something that we're going to support. But their overall plan is really Monday to Friday, 7 to 4. Folks have also asked about, what are the impacts in parking? And, this operation is not a personnel intensive operation. This is different than when you're building a new large building and you have a lot of different trades folks. I think you can see from some of those earlier photos, there's large equipment and operators, but this is not a personnel intensive operation. And so we would expect sort of 15 to 20 people associated with various contractor staff, and then 5 to 10 folks, consultants and city staff overseeing the demolition. We also want to just touch base on the sort of final site conditions, like what is the full scope of the work that we're doing. As we've discussed, our focus is on public health and public safety and the safe demolition of this building. And so we will be removing the entirety of the 9-story concrete building. We will not be doing anything with the Bradbury building. And we will also not be doing anything with the building foundation. And so the work that we're doing, we're not demolishing the foundations. We're not installing new foundations. So we're not expecting sort of significant vibrations on site. We are also in the process of evaluating potential conflict between existing trees and the safe demolition. So we have confirmed that we do not need to remove any street trees. They will not be affected by that demolition. We will be doing some advanced pruning to make sure that we're limbing those up so that they're not damaged by the truck traffic adjacent to them, but there's no impact on those existing street trees. There are 4 private property trees on 221 Mount Auburn Street that we're still evaluating if those will need to be removed in order to support the safe demolition. We talked about this previously. I know there's a lot of questions folks have about, what's the future development on the site. And again, encourage folks to look back at the previous presentation where we went into this a little more deeply, but our focus really is about the safe demolition of 221 Mount Auburn. And then once the demolition is complete, the owners will really determine how to proceed with the site, and they are working through that process. At this point, they still anticipate that it will take at least a year to obtain legal authority to sort of sell or redevelop the property. So I wouldn't expect sort of imminent conversations about any redevelopment on the site. The other thing we want to focus some time tonight on is really, we focused a lot on who's doing the work, how are they approaching the work, how are they really focusing safety throughout that, And now we want to talk a little bit about what's the oversight and monitoring to ensure that that is what actually happens. So again, just like any kind of sort of planning, it's like, what's the upfront work? So again, we've got a strong team that's really committed to safety. We're working closely with Mass DEP as we're looking to permit this work. And then during the construction, the contractors, Consigli and North Star, have very clear responsibilities. We also have an incredibly strong oversight team, and we're going to go through each of those roles throughout. One of the things we're doing, and again, sort of on a protective nature, is installing vibration monitoring, and those are being installed sort of around the immediate site. And so again, like we talked about, we're not removing those foundations, so we're not expecting, significant vibrations from this operation, but we will be installing, 6 vibration monitors, again, sort of spread around the site. And so we'll be monitoring those. We're going to put them in advance of construction, so we have some good baseline data, and then also be monitoring those during construction, so that if there is any situation where we're seeing vibrations increasing, we can really take a closer look and figure out what's happening and if we need to make adjustments to the operations. This is an image that shows an example of the vibration monitoring setup. We've already done some inspections in those private homes to find locations that are in basements that really represent the vibrations sort of experienced by those properties. And I know we've had some questions about, well, how come you're not going farther out with that vibration monitoring? And it's really, we're starting with those closer properties, because if they don't have vibration issues, you don't see vibration issues beyond that. So even if your property doesn't have vibration monitoring installed, it is protected by this data. We're also doing some pre-construction surveys and post-construction surveys. And again, this is really focused on those properties that immediately abut the 221 Mount Auburn Street building. So again, we're doing a lot of work up front with our contractors with a plan and approach to make sure we have a safe operation. But if something were going to happen, or we were going to have issues with vibrations, these would be the properties where you would see those issues. And so it's really important to do pre-construction surveys of those locations. And again, it's those properties sort of within a 100-foot radius of the 221 Mount Auburn Street, as well as properties that have an immediate face onto that property. And I know some folks have asked, sort of, I live a block or two away and I'm concerned. And I just want to be really clear that, the focus is, and again, we got recommendations from our structural engineers about what is the limits and what's the right approach in terms of the pre-construction surveys. This slide has a lot of information, so I do want to spend a minute or two on it, because I know there's been a lot of conversation about, we've talked about, Mass DEP's role in terms of monitoring for asbestos and how we're managing that. We've also talked about the types of equipment and the wetting that's going to happen in terms of addressing asbestos. Asbestos, the key thing we need to do is manage dust. So we don't want the asbestos become airborne, and that's really where you have the concern. So the most important thing we can do is have the right equipment, have the right personnel on staff, and have that be actively wetting that material so that you're reducing that dust, so you're not seeing that dust. So that's sort of operationally what we do. Now we also want to confirm that that is actually what's happening. And so we talked about TRC. They will have an asbestos project manager that's licensed through Mass DLS. That person will be on site throughout the demolition with the authority to shut down the operations if they're not being handled according to plan, or if we're seeing any issues there. We also have a significant number of air monitoring sites that we will be establishing around the demolition. So we anticipate sort of 6 fixed locations, and again, sort of surrounding that entire property. And those would be fixed and be tested throughout the demolition. And then we would have another 1 or 2 units that move around and is relocated to where the demolition is occurring on that day. So we would have a total of 8 different monitoring locations. They would be pulling air throughout the demolition process and then tested twice a day. And we talked a little bit earlier that TRC has their own lab. They will also be having inspections of that air quality sampling on site. And so it's not that we're taking sampling and then getting results back 3 days later. They're really doing the testing and getting samples on the daily basis. And again, twice a day for a total of 16 different samples per day. And again, sort of another sort of closing overall approach about safety and oversight and monitoring. And it really is this full team that is part of that. And again, each person sort of plays a different role, but it is an important piece in terms of having the right team together, both in terms of doing the work as well as overseeing that work. This is a high-level overview of schedule. One of the things, once we get into, and I'll talk about this in a second, but once we're getting into the demolition, we will be posting weekly updated schedules, and that will be a schedule that's both a 3-week look ahead and a 6-week look ahead, so people can really have an understanding of what they can expect in the next couple weeks. And again, the closer weeks are going to be more defined, and then there's more uncertainty as the timeline goes out. But we want to be sharing information with people as much as we can. And so if we look at the schedule where we are right now, next week we would really begin installing that vibration monitoring, doing the pre-construction surveys, so we get that in place actively before the construction occurs. And then beginning the week of November 3rd, you'll start to see more activity on site. If people are around, you've already seen more contractors doing site visits, doing that prep work. But beginning November 3rd, you'll start to see the contractors on site. And again, they'll be establishing the perimeter that we talked about, bringing in a site trailer. And so you'll start seeing those activities. And then in mid-November, you would start to see the larger pieces of equipment coming on site. The high reach excavator that Jake talked about, takes about 2 weeks to get set up on site. And so again, you'll start seeing that activity in mid-November, and then demolition would really begin in earnest December 1st. We're anticipating that to take about 4 months. And so that will continue through March, and then there'll be final site work and cleanup in terms of how we're leaving the site. We want to leave the site so that it's safe, that it drains. But again, that's sort of like the limit of where the city is, but there is some cleanup and site work. And one of the things I want to talk about is, when we had this last meeting, our hope was to get under construction demolition earlier than we are. But we've really been working on getting the right team in place, having the right conversations with DEP to make sure that when we begin the demolition, we have good, strong plans and we have the right team in place to do this work. So I think I'm going to turn it back to Kristen and then give us a little bit of update about sort of what's next for residents. And then we will get to the Q&A and look forward to hearing from folks. So thank you.
Thank you, Kathy. We're going to continue to update the project page. That's going to be the first source of information, and that's cambridgema.gov/221 Mount Auburn Street. We highly suggest when you visit that site, you click the contact tab, and it gives you the opportunity to sign up for email notifications. If you have already signed up, you got a reminder for the meeting today. You got an invitation to the meeting a couple weeks ago, and it's really the source that you should be signing up. In the case of something, it would have to be, certain situations we can hand flyer, but the email notifications is really ideally the source. You'll notice that we've been putting up those drone surveys under the documents tab on that page. And just in that same manner, we're going to be putting up the monitoring reports, the vibration reports, and the air monitoring reports. And the plan is to post those weekly. I can update you as we go. We'll see which date those are received, and I'll try to keep it to a consistent track of posting those. A lot of you have already read the current frequently asked questions document that's also under the documents tab. And again, after this evening's meeting, we'll provide an update to that and replace that under the documents tab. And if you come across anything, if you just take a second before you write in, oftentimes it's already in that document, and you can have that right there and available. Tonight's presentation, a couple of your neighbors have wrote in and they were unable to attend due to other obligations. So if you talk to anyone that was unable to attend or maybe you just want to re-listen. It will be available at some point tomorrow on the project page. I would say tomorrow morning, but that might be, we'll see. It will be before 5 p.m. tomorrow. I'll get that right up on the page for you all. My contact information is there on the screen. Please reach out after this evening. If you take another listen and you think of questions that you didn't have available tonight and you want to ask them, feel free to write in at any time, and we will get back to you. And then again, if anything happens on site, or if you have any emergency questions that are after hours, please call either 911 or the police non-emergency line that's there on the screen. That's the 349-3300. And that's again for emergency situations after hours. If it's before 5 p.m., you can call me on any of my contact information that's there, or send an email. All right, it looks like we're ready for Q&A. And just before we begin, I mentioned earlier, but we do have over 375 registered guests with us virtually here tonight. And I really want to make sure we get to as many questions as possible. So at the bottom of your screen, there's the Q&A box that you can write your questions in. And if you could please keep them as brief as possible, just so when we're going through them, it will be easier and we can get to as many as possible. We will update the FAQ document with some common themes that we get this evening from the questions. And if you're unable to submit your question using the Q&A box, you can feel free to give me an email. I know I actually got several emails already with some questions during the presentation, so feel free to email me if you find that easier. I'm going to stop sharing just to make it a little bit easier here. And we'll jump right in. Our first question, Kathy, I know we touched upon the water and the water that's going to be used for suppression, but if you can talk a little bit more about where is that dirty water going? Is it going into the Cambridge sewers, or is it the contaminated water going somewhere else?
That is a really good question. And I'm sorry we didn't cover it proactively, but as Jake talked about, the idea is that we're wetting the material. This is not about drowning the material. We're not looking to add weight to the building. It's really about moisting, keeping it wet and moist and not having dust, managing dust. And so, we're not seeing excess water, but the water that is recaptured, the water will be recaptured on site and then reused to wet the material as it's being loaded and taken off, and again, disposed of as asbestos-containing material. So the water would not be entering into the storm system, the drainage system, and it would be reused on site, again, to wet that material as it's loaded and as they're continuing to manage that asbestos-containing material to keep it wet and manage that dust.
Thank you. Our next question is a little bit traffic related. It's a couple parts. Will parking, car, and road access be any further affected on Mount Auburn in that area between Willard and the construction site during the demolition?
So we're not, again, we talked a little bit about this. Again, we're not seeing significant number of contractor vehicles or others. We're not seeing a significant impact in more parking or other traffic. And I think Jake talked a little bit about, we're continuing to look at those zones and see, as demolition progresses, are there streets and access points that we can reopen to, take some of the burden off of the neighborhood in terms of reopening some of these connections. So we're not seeing any, any additional significant impact. And again, that may change depending on the exact operations, but we're not seeing a significant change from what's out there today.
Will the pedestrian sidewalk on the south side of Memorial Drive remain open throughout the demolition?
On the south side of Memorial Drive, yes, we're not seeing any operations that would affect that south side of Memorial Drive. And again, I'm sort of, as we're looking at the demolition progresses, we're looking at, is there any of that existing closure that we could reopen? But we're not seeing, we're not recommending or seeing any expansion of that further into Mount Auburn, further into Memorial Drive. So yes, the path on the south side along the river would continue to remain open.
And when do you expect Mount Auburn to reopen to traffic, Mount Auburn Street?
Yeah, we don't have a great answer to that. And again, I think it's, we need to get out there, get established, see how the work progresses, and see what that looks like on site. I want to have these guys have space to work with so that they can complete a safe demolition project and know that the continued closure of the streets and sidewalks in the area is a significant impact on residents. So we're really trying to balance that. So we've talked about, as we can open up streets and access points, we will. But it's really, I can't at this point really have a definitive date on that.
And the next few questions are about the air quality monitoring. I know the party originally asked how we're going to share those results, and that will be in the weekly reports. But if the samples find that the air quality is triggered or unsafe in some way, how will the neighbors be notified?
So the critical piece of that is Mass DEP, right? So we immediately notify Mass DEP and then work with them in terms of what does that mean in terms of the operation. If there are exceedances, what does that mean? What do we change with the operation, and how do we respond to that? So I don't have a definitive answer in terms of exactly how that process will go. I think that's some of what we're still trying to work through. So we definitely want to be posting and consistently posting these results. But again, our focus is really on what's a safe operation, how do we avoid those situations, and then continue to work on that notification process. So again, I go back to, when Kristen, when you talked about making sure that you're signing up for the email notifications, that is the best way. If we need to get out information to the community quickly, that is going to be the best available. That is going to be our best approach. So again, presumably most folks on this email call are already signed up, but if you know friends or neighbors that are not, we really encourage people to sign up for that distribution list.
Do you know if that monitoring is done at ground level, or is it done at a certain elevation?
So the primary locations are at ground level. As we've had the conversations with DEP, we've also been talking about, do we need to have, recommend higher level monitoring as well? And so we're still finalizing some of those details with DEP. One of the things I think was in the slide that we did not talk about is that once we have this non-traditional work plan that is approved by DEP, we will be posting that on the website as well, so people can really dig into those details. Right now we have we've been going back and forth with DEP, gotten really good feedback from them about what they're looking for. And one of the things they mentioned was, ground level where people are breathing is really important, but we also want to have some supplemental higher level air quality monitors.
Are these readings multi-point, or are they continuous monitoring?
So it's continuous pulling in air for a 4-hour sample, and then the sample is tested.
If somebody notices dust in their home or in their unit, can they call and have us test it?
So again, we are testing at the site. And so there is dust that happens naturally in the environment. And so I don't want people to say, oh, we have dust and we're, be concerned about that. What we are doing is really testing at that site. So we are having the testing boundary around the site. So there's 6 different locations, as well as at the actual closer to the demolition itself. And so those would be the triggers. And so if we're not seeing exceedances at those locations, there's no reason to expect that there would be exceedances outside of that. And so really the most effective approach to that monitoring and testing is to have it at the on the property boundary to make sure that there's nothing going beyond that.
Another interesting question about the water suppression. Will the fire department still have enough water from hydrants in the area with all the water that they'll be needing for this project?
Yeah, so we've been working on, there's 3 different hydrants. So folks are working on the specific locations we're going to access the water. We do have good flow in that area, and we'll continue to coordinate with the fire department. But again, this is, it's, and Jake may have better details, but, it's really about having powerful water. It's not necessarily a huge volume of water that we're looking at any one time.
Somebody's wondering about the dust mitigation in regards to when we leave the site overnight or for a weekend, and there's some debris left there. What is our methods that we'll use?
So again, we'll be moistening it. And again, if we need to have people in over the weekend, it's going to be very site specific and sort of what's going on in that operation. I think one of the things Kristen mentioned is that, anytime there's an issue with the site, Kristen is always a good contact to call. But if people see anything over the weekend that is of concern, we really encourage folks, you can call the non-emergency police line and they will get to us. But we will have, again, both, staff from the contractor as well as, TRC that's really monitoring any of that asbestos containing material and making sure that it is safely managed both during the construction operation and over the weekend.
We have a few different people asking where the debris goes, and I think we did mention they want to make sure they heard us correctly that it's going to Ohio.
Yes, it is going to Ohio. I think, as people can imagine, it is not easy to find landfills that can take this type of material. And so it is being trucked to Ohio. And so that is why it's really important that they're thinking about how the overall truck in those liners work and making sure that it is safely transported again from all the way from, sort of beginning to end. So from 221 Mount Auburn Street to the point where it goes to Ohio for the landfill and permanent disposal.
Kathy, is there a max wind speed that would ever cause a stoppage to work?
There is, and I know, and I can't remember what the number was, if it was 30 miles an hour or 40 miles an hour, looking at Jake and Jason, if they have that. Jake?
Yeah, this is something that is incorporated into the non-traditional work plan to be reviewed by the Mass DEP. Right now, I believe it is set at gusts of 30 or sustained winds greater than 25.
Thank you. Actually, while I have you, do the cranes, someone's asking if the cranes claw the materials to the ground and then workers would come and put them into the trucks, or do the machinery take the debris and go right into the truck beds?
The machinery will also load it right into the truck beds, at which point it will then be, once it's taken out of the exclusion zone for safety, field staff can go in and line those double-lined trailers and seal them up appropriately for removal from the site.
Thank you. Kathy, is the city monitoring the demolition independently of the contractors that we've gathered on our team?
Yes, absolutely. So we talked a little bit at the beginning about our capital buildings group. So those folks will have personnel on site, again, similar to, and some of those folks are coming from other large projects, but we will also have our own site that is, again, managing the various construction contractors as well as the consultant. So we will have people on site that are, again, overseeing this work and then also available for any logistics with neighbors as well.
We have a question if there are going to be any changes to Spark Street access or any additional closures on Spark Street with the plan that we show tonight.
Yeah, so one of the things, and we didn't really go into the details, but when you look at the presentation on the left side of Spark Street, you'll see these green boxes when Jake went through those, the sort of the phasing plan. There will be these large boxes, sort of 8-foot tall boxes that, again, are providing additional physical protection for those properties along Spark Street. So there are properties along Spark Street that will not have access to their driveways for, a couple of months. And so we're coordinating directly with those folks. Overall access on Spark Street is not anticipated to change significantly. The other thing, and I just want to recognize this and just be really clear, is that we're also having conversations with 205 residents. So at 205 Mount Auburn Street, as Jake went through those plans, that building is within that 42-foot exclusion zone. And so in order for them to really proceed with the work, we will need to have those residents vacated, again, until that section of the building that is closest to them is demolished and pulled away. So we are working closely with them on the details and really trying to minimize the impact on those residents to the extent we can, knowing that we need to safely demolish this building.
You absolutely just answered. Somebody was curious if they had to vacate through the end of January, yet the image we showed this evening showed it going through March. What was that reasoning? And so I think you just explained that as that side.
Yeah, absolutely. So again, I think it was 1, 2, 3. So phase 3 on that plan, once that phase is completed and the building now is not 42 feet away from 205 Mount Auburn, but is, 60 or 70 feet away, and I don't know the dimensions, but then they would no longer be in that exclusion zone and they could reoccupy the building. So demolition would continue beyond that, but the 221 Mount Auburn Street building will be pulled away from 205. And so they will be, the contractors would have more space to work with. And then that at 42, that 42-foot exclusion zone would no longer extend onto 205 Mount Auburn Street property.
Can you speak a little bit about rain and snow considerations when it comes to particularly truck tires, maybe picking up some of that contaminated material and then driving down our roadways? Do we have any mitigation plan for that?
Yeah, absolutely. And I don't know, Jake, if you can talk a little bit about, sort of the decontamination of the trucks before they leave the site, sort of irrespective of rain or whatever, that there's proactive management of those vehicles before they leave the site.
I certainly can. So, as part of the non-traditional work plan, we are required to install a truck wash station at the exit of the job site. This will mean all of the trucks to leave the regulated area must go through this truck wash, get their wheels and their trailers rinsed down, deemed free of any debris before they can exit the site. And of course, TRC is on site as a project monitor. They will monitor that process and make sure that these vehicles are clean as they are leaving. And that includes anything in the tires that may have been picked up by snow, rain, mud, etc.
Thank you. And Kathy, I'm not sure if you'll want to enlist some help from Chief Cahill on this, but will the fire department still respond to 205 Mount Auburn Street, if there were ever a fire while it is vacated?
Absolutely. Chief Cahill, if you want to respond, that would be super helpful.
Yeah, that's great. Good evening, everyone. I appreciate the opportunity to answer this question and any more that you have. First off, we've been working closely with the city departments and contractors from the beginning of this project. And from a public safety perspective, I'm very confident in all the plans and proposals that have been presented for us for review. Cambridge is one of 6 Class 1 departments in Massachusetts, in part because of our preparedness and staffing for any type of emergency. The 221 Mount Auburn Street demo is unique in the sense that on your typical fire, collapse, or other emergency, we really don't get advance notice. In this case, we're very aware of the location, the building itself, as well as the surrounding buildings that could be impacted, like 205. We have developed incident action plans for all conceivable incidents, and I have no doubt in our ability to safely mitigate if anything is to occur. However, as the deputy city manager referenced, we have full confidence in our contractors and their abilities to safely do the work. That's the long answer. The shorter answer is absolutely. We'll respond to any incident, regardless of what's taking place.
Great. Thank you, Chief Cahill.
Thank you. And Jake, I know you mentioned this a little bit earlier, but if you want to go into it in a little more detail, how will the water still be effective if the temperatures are below freezing this winter?
Yes, the water is going to be provided through fire hydrants. We are going to take measures on our end at the start, throughout, and at the end of our shifts to make sure none of our equipment has any freezing problems. And that could be storage in temperature regulated boxes. As we've discussed, some will be erected along the Spark Street side for a physical barrier. They could be dual purpose to store equipment as well. And our dust suppression equipment has functions and components of it which prevent freezing. They have freeze out plugs and fail safes. They have modes that allow you to shut down the atomizing of the water and have a steady stream and flow of water so that it's always running and it can avoid freezing.
Thank you. And I'm still getting the question of, will the water be treated to remove any asbestos materials after it's recaptured and reused on site?
So, I mean, I think the water will be disposed of as asbestos containing material. So the plan is really to continue to reuse it and use it to wet that material that's on site. And so you would not expect to see a lot of excess water. Any excess water would be not treated, but would be disposed of as asbestos containing material. So again, there's not anticipated water going into the drainage system. It's really being managed as asbestos containing material.
Thank you. Are you recommending that abutters vacate the area during the demolition work?
So we talked a little bit about this, when the plans that North Star and Consigli have really developed for the demolition, again, focus on those. What are those safe zones that they need to have, those exclusion zones to not have folks, including their operators, including their own personnel, not occupied during the demolition. And based on that, we have ordered that the residents of 205 Mount Auburn Street vacate their homes until that building can be pulled away from them. There's no other recommendations for people to vacate properties around the demolition process.
Thank you. Do you have any information on if you think air purifiers are successful in mitigating some of the contaminants in the air that we've spoken about?
I mean, people talk about air purifiers. We're not seeing that as effective for asbestos. That we really need to manage asbestos at the site. I think air purifiers can always have some benefit to the to residents. I certainly want to have one in my own home. It like helps my husband's allergies, and so I think there can be benefits to it. But in terms of asbestos, we're not looking for individual air purifiers to address that. That really is the responsibility of how we're organizing and managing the demolition.
Does the team have a plan for rodent control?
So we've talked a little bit about this with some specific properties. We were looking at doing rodent control on site. What I would say is that this is not deep excavation. It's not deep utility work. We're not removing those foundations. So we would not expect to see significant rodent issues. We do have both from the city side as well, resources if we do see issues and need to address, but would not expect to see significant rodent activity or changes with rodents in the area based on the demolition.
We mentioned that the trucks would exit on Mount Auburn and head towards the Fresh Pond area. Do we plan on sharing the exact route that the trucks will take?
Yeah. So again, and I should have started this in the beginning. I think we did this last time. The city's commitment throughout this process has really been to share information as quickly as we can and be as transparent as we can throughout this process. It does mean that we are continually getting information and trying to share it quickly. So we just today we're looking at the routing map, and we will definitely be sharing that on the FAQs, looking at the sort of where they're coming from and to. So again, definitively can say they are on Mount Auburn Street, pulling in one side, pulling out the other side, and coming in, going to other major arterials. So you're not, seeing these large trucks on small residential streets. But yeah, we can, as part of our FAQs, can be adding that to the website, Kristen.
Has our team seen that such asbestos abatement methods as the one that we're going to use is safe in the long term?
Yeah, and I think this really goes back to Mass DEP, right? So we're looking, Mass DEP is the regulatory agency that manages these types of demolitions, manages asbestos controlled in buildings and the demolishing of those. They have really clear, thoughtful regulations and requirements about that. As we've had conversations with them, they've shared their experience with other projects. And again, Jake talked about some of their experience. And I think it is quite successful in terms of, again, having good plans, having good operations, and combining that with good air quality data so that you're really confirming that those methods are working.
This might be for either Jason or Jake, but what's the average weight of one of the loaded trucks?
Those trucks will go out at about an average of 30 tons.
30 tons.
Less than a fire truck.
I like it. That's easier for someone like myself.
No,
I wasn't sure what 30 tons was.
No, exactly. No. It's good perspective. It's always helpful to have a good reference point there. Thanks, Jason. And I should have introduced Jason Flood is from Consigli. So we also have him here as well, who's really leading the Consigli team. And again, similar to some of the other folks like SGH and TRC, has really been involved in the work around 221 even before the city got involved. So again, super helpful to have folks that have been involved with the building, understand the situation, the detailed structural issues with the building, and are familiar with it, really be joining the team and helping the city through this process.
Is there an estimated risk of the building collapsing during demolition? Is that something that was assessed during the planning?
So, there's not and we've talked about this even before when we were looking at closing streets. It's, we know that there is risk associated with this building. We know that there is risk associated with this building remaining in place. So the thing we can do most effective to reduce risk is to demolish it. As these guys have looked at it, they have structural engineers that are looking at the building, understand the punching shear failure risk, and have really thought carefully about how to phase that demolition to really minimize that risk. And again, we'll continue to evaluate that throughout. One of the things we didn't talk about that is in some of the details from, North Star is also having a drone that is looking into the building as they're doing the demolition. So again, doing everything they can to keep people and personnel away from the building, but having as much information throughout that process as possible. So again, all these different ways of really trying to reduce that risk.
We currently have a lot of police personnel assisting with the different traffic closures, but do we plan on having any police monitoring the closed off areas, both on Mount Auburn Street and around the site?
So I think there's a couple different questions sort of embedded in there. So one, right now we have, and when we first did the detours on Mount Auburn Street, we had more police details, and we've really tried to dial those back to where they're really needed for those high volume turns and to really manage traffic, particularly during peak hours. As we shift into construction, we will also be having police details right around the construction zone. And that is to really assist with safety during that demolition and sort of making sure, people and vehicles are navigating safely. We've also had requests, particularly, when we're having a vacant building immediately adjacent, having increased police presence. And so that is also a conversation that we're having in terms of having more police eyes on the location.
Is there any general advice that we can offer the neighborhood, such as closing windows or limiting walking around the site during the act of demolition? Not on the site. So that was poorly worded. Walking around the area of the site.
Yeah. I really, again, it's like I think there will be construction noise. I mean, I know we've also heard from folks about, should I not be working at home? And I just want to be really clear. This will be, a loud operation. I think it could be a quite interesting operation. And so I anticipate that there will be a number of folks that want to, sort of do some observations, and we need to keep a safe zone around that. But we're really looking all the ways that we can reduce that risk and monitoring on those edges. So we're not anticipating any additional sort of closures of streets, closures of sidewalks, or limiting access beyond that sort of work zone that we talked about.
Do we have a contingency plan for an excessive snow load?
So, we had talked about, we really wanted to be getting this demolition underway. If we have a major snowstorm, I think that's one of the things we need to talk about. I don't think we've really dug into that quite yet. I don't know, Jake or Jason, I don't want to put you on the spot. Again, I think some of this is we're continuing to evolve and work through this plan, but we will have larger equipment on site. And so we may have some more opportunities to address things than we typically would.
Someone asked if for safety, will the playground on Mount Auburn Street be closed?
No, there's no additional closures that we're expecting. And again, as the demolition progresses, and if we can pull things back, we will. But yeah, we're not expecting any additional closures beyond that immediate zone that Jake sort of went through, the sort of yellow box.
And will abutters on dead-end streets such as Camden Place be affected by the demolition truck traffic?
No, again, all the truck traffic is really going to be on Mount Auburn Street. And so you're not going to see those vehicles on any kind of, and certainly they wouldn't be on the dead end. I mean, they really want to, like, as straight a shot as they can make is the beneficial to all of us. And so that truck traffic will really be on. And again, it's one of the benefits of having Mount Auburn Street there, having that access. And so that truck traffic will really be, those larger vehicles will be on Mount Auburn Street.
This next one you explained to me personally to understand it a little better, but we're getting a lot of questions about the dust management of streets that are further away than where our dust monitoring is. So I think you explained it, that if the dust you're testing at site is not exceeding levels, you would assume that the further away you go.
Correct. I mean, it's like if you're in good shape close, then if you're a block away, you can only get better the farther away you are from the situation. So that's why, having the dust monitoring, the air quality monitoring along the edges of the 221 Mount Auburn Street parcel is really important. Because again, we want to protect those properties that are closest. And by protecting those, again, if you're farther away, you're even more protected.
And we might have to get this number for this person later, but someone asked if we knew the standard base level of the dust per volume, like what our base level is when we're doing that dust testing.
I don't, but we can put that in the
Okay.
FAQs because I want to make sure we get it accurate. So we can definitely put that into the FAQs, Kristen.
And this one I was curious about as well. Why is the western side being demolished in 2 phases? People are wondering, it seems like it would be easier while you're over there to do that side at once.
And we talked about that, and because it certainly makes sense. I think one of the big significant issues is that until we demolish section 3, the residents of 205 have to vacate. And so we want to, as Jake talked about, start on that west side, give themselves some more space to work with. There's more space on that side to really get started, but we really want to get through that 3rd phase closest to 205 Mount Auburn Street, so we can really reduce the impact on those residents.
You mentioned that we will not be removing foundations as part of this work, but what happens to the foundations after the demolition, as far as we're concerned, is completed?
So again, we talked a little bit about, our role here is really focused on public health and safety, removing the 9-story building that has significant structural issues. As a separate process, the residents of 221 Mount Auburn Street need to determine what will happen with that parcel. And so one would imagine that would be a redevelopment project. And then as part of that, they would look at those existing foundations as well as new foundations. So, but again, that would be a process that, I would not anticipate beginning for, at least a year in terms of them going through the legal process to be in a position to sell the building before they can really do that kind of work.
Someone asked about the decibel level of the construction noise. Will we be limiting the noise in any way?
Yeah, so, and I don't have the numbers right, we can put this on the FAQs, but, we have the Cambridge noise ordinance. There's a couple things in there. One is about the hours of work that we talked about. It also talks about the decibel levels at the property line. The equipment that we're talking about, we do not see that those would exceed those levels. So again, we can put that into the specifics. I don't want to give misinformation, but we can put the specific levels into the FAQs, but we would be following the noise ordinance. And again, I want to be really clear. This is, heavy, loud construction. So it will definitely be, if you right there are walking by, it's noticeable, but we would be following the requirements of the Cambridge noise ordinance, both in terms of the hours of work as well as the anticipated decibel levels at the edge of those property lines.
The party that originally asked the question about long-term exposure, and we said that we're working with Mass DEP, they had a follow-up. They want to know if people have ever been exposed to this type of demolition and they've been followed for long-term effects, and if we don't know, if there's any way that we can find that information out.
I do not know offhand. We can definitely ask that question and get back to folks, because that's a really good question. So I don't want to give people misinformation. So let us get back and we will provide that information on the website.
Someone's curious which driveways will be blocked on Spark Street.
It's just the first 3 properties on Spark Street. So all of those affected residents we have spoken with. So again, in advance of this meeting, we've really been trying to reach out to residents that are, directly significantly impacted in terms of access. And so we've spoken directly to those 3 property owners. So if we haven't spoken to you, you are in good shape in terms of your driveway access. But it's really just 3 parcels on Spark Street. And again, similar to what we talked about on the east side, I have to think about my east and west. On the Spark Street side, as we're able to pull that demolition away, we would, reduce that exclusion zone as we're able to.
Are there any air monitoring plans along the truck route? Maybe it's a good time to talk about the liners and just go over that one more time.
Yeah, again, so there is not, because again, there should be no coming out of that truck. So again, you have that truck, you have 10 milliliter liners, thick liners that are in that truck. And so again, they're loading the truck and then they are closing and sealing one liner and then closing and sealing the other liner. And so those are completely enclosed. There's no debris. It's not, I know sometimes when you're driving down the highway, you might see an open dump truck that has a cover on it that's not much of a cover. That is not what we're talking about here. This is a very different operation and a very different controlled operation.
A neighbor brought up that a lot of these homes have fieldstone foundations on an area that used to be a marsh, so they're concerned with the vibrations. Is there anything that we're going to do to minimize the vibrations associated?
Again, we're not doing, deep excavation. We're not doing that kind of work. We're not seeing this as a vibration heavy type of operation. We do have those vibration monitors that are going in, and we'll be monitoring that vibration data. And if we do see, there's some activity going on and you're seeing that increase over, the sort of standard level, then we would, shut down the operation and figure out what's going on and make those adjustments. But that is the reason that we have those vibration monitors going in, and again, into those properties that are closest to the demolition.
Somebody asked if we're coordinating with the DCR about pedestrian traffic. Whoever wrote that in, if you have any specific concerns that you've encountered in regards to pedestrian traffic with DCR, if you want to just email me directly, and we can get you an answer to that. But on the overall, I haven't been made aware of any
Correct.
issues with pedestrian traffic.
Right, but we are continuing to coordinate with DCR. I know the transportation department has been working with them, trying to make some adjustments with, the signal at Hawthorne. I know that's been a sort of a pain point in terms of traffic flow. So the Department of Transportation is really coordinating quite closely with DCR to continue to make adjustments in terms of the setup. So yeah, to Kristen's point, if people have specific issues or concerns, please let us know and we will continue to follow up on those.
Would you say the risk of asbestos would be for the entire 4-month duration, or do you find that it would be any more or less at the beginning or the end?
I mean, the demolition will be pretty consistent throughout. And again, the asbestos is, consistent throughout the building. Again, with similar to any property we have in the city of that era or earlier. And so we would, that would be pretty consistent throughout the process in terms of asbestos being in the building in each of those different phases.
I think the answer to this will be no, but would we consider reopening one lane on Mount Auburn Street for buses only?
We've been talking about this, and I think at this point, no, you're correct. But I think, as construction progresses, again, we'll continue to look at those exclusion zones. I think it's unlikely that we'll be able to reopen Mount Auburn Street, but we've been clear in talking with folks that we need to continue to shrink that zone as we can. So, if we were able to and maintain a safe operation for the demolition, we would certainly consider to take on, any changes that would reduce the impacts on, the traffic flow in the area. But at this point, I would say no, but we will continue to look at it because we really do want to continue to make it work better for folks.
Can you just review once more with the construction working hours?
Sure. So again, under the noise ordinance, without a variance to that, construction is allowed 7 to 6 Monday through Friday, and 9 to 6 on Saturday. We are anticipating 7 to 4 Monday through Friday, a standard construction operation. So they're going to plan the work, schedule it, and the goal is really 7 to 4 Monday through Friday. We're not looking at weekend work. We did talk about weekend work in terms of, we know it's a big inconvenience and impact on the neighborhood, but if it got completed sooner, would that be better? And again, with the significant trucking operation and needing to be able to have delivery to the landfill, we don't see that as viable. So our standard construction hours will be 7 to 4 Monday through Friday.
Do you have any plans to potentially reopen the pedestrian route on Mount Auburn Street?
Again, that south sidewalk on Mount Auburn Street, I think, that would be the first piece that we might be able to reopen. But again, we want to see the operation and have that in place before we make any adjustments to that. So I do know that that is a significant impact, not being able to have that bike or pedestrian access along Mount Auburn Street. So again, it's something we've talked about. At this point, we don't feel like we can reopen anything, but again, would continue to look at that.
A few more questions about the considerations of wind.
Yeah.
people are concerned that if it is windy this winter, the dust would travel farther. Do we have any precautions for wind?
So again, I don't know if Jake can talk to this, but I think again, it's like any exposed debris that you would keep moist and keep wetted. And again, I know we keep repeating that, like, but it is the single most important thing as we're looking at handling this building. And again, we would not have demolition ongoing into if it's a high wind situation. And then would again have people on site in terms of maintaining any debris that has been on site. I don't know, Jake, did you have different thoughts or anything to add?
No, you nailed it there, Kathy.
Okay.
Uh, this this work is taking place during the holiday season, so will there be any pauses during the end of year holidays?
Again, we will not be working on, sort of official holidays but we're not planning on taking off weeks at a time for our holidays. And I, again, know that's an impact in terms of the neighbors, but, really the focus is on getting this building demolished. So I'm not, looking to, direct these guys to not work for, a week or two at a time, but really, individual days, but we would want to keep those operations continuous as much as we can.
This next one's interesting to me. Is there a reason we didn't decide to have two crews to demo each end at the same time, cutting down the time of the demolition?
Jake, do you want to touch base on that one? I think it's a pretty tight site for one thing, but go ahead.
The greatest concern with the building is the structural issues that are presented at the time. And by doubling the work zones in the building, we're doubling the load on the slab, and we're doubling effectively the areas that'll be under increased distress. And the plan was designed by the structural engineers to do this in a fashion that puts minimal risk and concern on the building and portions of it which will remain intact as we demolish it, because we're simply not at that part of the building yet. So it was decided by the engineers after very extensive review that this is by and large the safest way to do it.
Yeah, it's a good point, Jake. We didn't talk a lot about, we're talking, the engineered demolition plan, which really is looking at the phases. One of the first things that stood out to me was, phase one is about the balconies, and people, I sort of was like, oh, that seems like a small part of the building. What's the focus on those? And, even starting with those are cantilevered balconies. And so in order to sort of reduce the risk on the building, you don't want things hanging there unnecessarily. And so again, phase one is about those balconies, and then the additional phases are really by different sections of the building. And so you're focusing those sort of changes on the building at one area at a time.
Have we been coordinating with any of the schools in the area? There's some concern that some of these minors play outside, and from a health and safety perspective.
So we've been coordinating with schools more around transportation. So again, we're managing the site, and so we're not seeing risk in terms of increased risk to schools in the area, but the coordination we've really focused on, and Kristen, you can speak to this probably better than I can, around transportation. So maybe if you want to touch base on that, the work we did when we initially closed Mount Auburn Street and Spark Street, as well as the sort of doing that work in September.
Yeah, so all of our traffic plans and even a reminder about increased traffic come move-in season, both when we first initiated the closures and then come September, were shared with the local Cambridge Public Schools, and we're in close contact with their busing folks. And then the BB&N school has been very closely monitoring. We had our first meeting on their facility, and they've been in communication with us, as well as even just as recent as last weekend, the regatta. We got in touch with the folks planning that, and they were able to send out all attendees information about our closures ahead of time. And then, of course, the Mount Auburn Hospital we've been meeting with fairly regularly to let them know of any traffic changes, and they've been really helpful in getting the information out to any not only the patients and visitors, but also their employees who have to travel this way every day. At the end of this work, we keep mentioning that we're going to return the site to a safe condition. Can you talk a little bit about what that means, and how would it be safe if there are open foundations after the demolition? Would it remain fenced off?
So, we need to continue coordinating with the owners in terms of how the fencing remains for the site. Some of the fencing is our fencing, some of the fencing is their fencing, so we need to finalize that. But when I'm focusing on safety, it's really about the structurally compromised building has been removed. We don't have, any risk associated with that structure. And then also looking at sort of minor paving in the parking lot, making sure the site drains and sort of, can sort of be in a stable environment until there is some, redevelopment or reuse of the site by the owners.
We have very strict anti-idling policies here, both in Cambridge and in the state. Will the trucks that are waiting to be loaded be idling throughout the day, or will they be turned off while they're being loaded?
So we will absolutely enforce. I mean, I think the other thing we should just touch base on here is the hours we talked about, 7 a.m. start. And then, that means there's not heavy equipment going on. There's not sort of general activity before that. And similarly with idling, we would also enforce, the state idling regulations. Now, if there's equipment that needs to be running again for sort of, heating the water and heating equipment, there will be activities associated with that. But in terms of idling, we would absolutely follow the state regulations. And again, this is where we talk about, we also have, city personnel on site. So again, that's not going to be the focus of TRC, who's really on site to be monitoring the environmental conditions, SGH who's looking more at the structural conditions. And that is the kind of area where the city staff really play a critical role in terms of making sure the site is being managed consistent with those kinds of both city regulations and state regulations.
We mentioned the noise and how, of course, it's going to be loud during the demolition. Is there anything, do you know if it will be equally as bad in the morning or in the afternoon? We have some folks that are working from home that are wondering if maybe the loud work would be at a certain hour. I am assuming that the answer is no. Throughout that entire workday, we're going to hear noise.
It may vary by the day, but absolutely between 7 and 4, people should anticipate, pretty significant construction activity. Like that is what we need to do to get the building down. And so again, there might be moments where it's a little quieter, but between 7 and 4, people should be prepared and expect pretty consistent construction activity on site.
We spoke about coordinating traffic impacts with the Mount Auburn Hospital, but will they be impacted at all in any other ways?
No, we've been meeting pretty regularly with Mount Auburn Hospital, starting when we really, when we made the decision to close Mount Auburn Street, which was a significant impact on them and their operations. And so we worked closely with them in terms of making some adjustments to a driveway that accesses from Memorial Drive so that they had additional opportunities for ambulances to access the hospital. That was one of, the really significant concerns, was making sure people could get to and from the hospital as easily as possible. And so that would be, really the impact on them is the access changes on Mount Auburn Street. And so we've continued to meet with them. I think when we first met with them, they were really some of the folks that brought up, some of the concerns and recommendations about, making, Lowell Street one way so that it doesn't hinder ambulance traffic. And so again, we've continued to work with them, take their feedback, and it's been really helpful in terms of managing traffic and making some of those adjustments. But the impact to them is really about the access changes along Mount Auburn Street.
This is our very first question about worker safety, so I really respect this this question. Are there plans to monitor lead levels in workers, or are medical consultations a part of working staff on this type of work?
So, I don't know if Jake or Jason can sort of talk about, we talked briefly about, the sort of asbestos controlled area where only workers in really appropriate PPE for that work can be. And so when they've talked about, and I think I referenced this, like one of the things that impressed me most personally with both Consigli and North Star was their focus on safety, focus on employee safety, and making sure that people have the right PPE and other equipment. But Jason, I don't know if you have other thoughts to add, that'd be helpful.
Yeah, I guess I'll just, I'll start off, Kathy, by saying that's a major piece of Consigli's role here, is to make sure that we're ensuring safety on the site. Ultimately, we're the ones responsible. North Star is working for us. Part of our process, I would say, in bringing on the right partner for the demo here was vetting the safety history of all the contractors that are going to be involved. including North Star and the several other demo contractors that we talked to leading up to this process. That said, we always ask questions and we never want to get complacent. I asked Jake when we got into this and we've walked the site. I've talked to the operators and the operations managers who will be active on this site. The exclusion zone is the first thing to hone in on. No workers will be inside that area without asbestos training. You'll see an area that's marked off. Employees outside that will not be in PPE. Inside they will have PPE. And Jake, you can touch on the safety of the operators and how you guys take care of your employees.
Thank you.
Absolutely, Jason. And part of the asbestos licensure process is a physical and a pulmonary fit test that goes into what our team needs to have the credentials to enter these work zones. So we do, as part of our corporate safety health policy, as well as the necessary steps required to get the appropriate credentials, we do medical screening of the staff.
And so that is consistent. And this goes back to, we talk about, the role of Mass DEP, and that's one of their requirements for some of these licensed site professionals is that, making sure they have the training to identify if they, are asked to enter an unsafe situation or asked to enter without the proper PPE, and that there's appropriate monitoring for those employees.
I just want to point out we're getting a lot of questions about should people keep their windows closed. And I do just want to, if we look at the schedule, just point out that we're talking about very cold temperatures. I think it's fair to say most windows would be closed anyway. And that's one perk of having ended up in this schedule with this dead of winter season.
Agreed. And again, because I think, there is natural dust that occurs. And I know that given the activity that we're happening, that's going to be of concern to people. So I think, anything people can do to reduce dust in their houses is going to be helpful just in terms of reducing those concerns. And so, as Kristen talked about, sort of December to March, I think, we would all have our windows closed naturally. So that is a benefit in terms of, again, reducing those kinds of concerns about what people would see in terms of dust in their properties.
If everything is under control as far as demolition, they're curious why a property would have to vacate. And I think we come back to that. I could even pull it up if I...
That's okay. I mean, I can talk through it, Kristen. So again, as these guys have looked at safety protocols and one, having space to work, and really looking at, okay, if something were going to happen structurally as they're removing pieces of the building, where is the most likely impact that would happen? And so again, we're not saying that is what we want to happen. These guys are taking every precaution that they can, but given how close 205 Mount Auburn Street is to the demolition, and again, following industry standards, looking really at the New York City Demolition Code, it's really good practice and, part of their safe operation to say, we do not want people in that zone. If there were going to be an issue, that is the zone that you would see a structural concern. And so, the contractor and their construction engineer are really saying that they cannot do this work with people in that building. They need to have those exclusion zones, know who's in those zones, and only have people necessary to complete the work in those protective cabs, and really reducing that risk. So again, everything that we're talking about is how are all the ways that we can reduce risk. I hope that, 6 months from now, everyone says to me that closing Mount Auburn Street was melodramatic and asking these people to evacuate was unnecessary. And that would be a good outcome. But we also want to make sure that we are taking every necessary precaution to reduce those risks and protect public health and safety throughout this process.
When we chose the locations of the vibration monitoring, did we consider the historical homes in the area?
So we really looked at different types of homes. We looked at different properties, looked at locations that had basements that were accessible, looked at locations that, had a power supply, and also, would be in a place where it wouldn't get kicked or, inadvertently moved. And so they looked at a number of different factors. And again, the critical point is to get a good distribution around the site so that we have good data regardless of which side of the building that they are working on.
Is there a reason we didn't go with a Monday through Saturday schedule to get the work done faster?
Again, we're always concerned about, the impact on the neighborhood. I think in this situation, the contractor, really feels like given the number of trucks that they need, the destination of those trucks, that Monday through Friday is a better operation. So, we teased that back and forth a little bit, but they felt pretty strongly that Monday through Friday, with the truck volume, that the types of trucks they need and being able to get those trucks lined up and to get to Ohio, that Monday through Friday was the appropriate schedule.
Will the employees and the workers of the site be parking on nearby neighborhood streets?
So again, we talked a little bit about, the short answer is no, and then let me tell you why. But we talked a little bit during the presentation that this is not an employee heavy operation. So when Jake talks about those equipment, there's one person doing that operation. There's one person manning the spray. And so we talked about, you might see 10 to 30 people on site a day. We do also have a fairly significant amount of space, sort of in the back on 221 on part of the property that they can use for their operations. And so we have a pretty good layout plan for them operating and having employees on site.
We talked about how the debris is going to be taken to Ohio. What kind of a facility, where in Ohio, and what happens once it gets there?
Jake, can you talk a little bit about the Ohio location?
I can. So the facility is Minerva Enterprises. They're located in Waynesburg, Ohio. It is an asbestos accepting landfill, and the material will be handled and disposed of properly, which is landfill wetting and burial of the debris.
So again, it's going to a landfill. It's managed as a landfill that is approved to take this type of material, and then managed there. So again, it's getting loaded, safely loaded, and then removed off site until it gets to that location in Ohio.
The buses are struggling with a stop sign that's on Appleton Street. We have a request to bring back a left turn on Appleton. It's very hard for the people in the area. I think we'll bring this to whoever asked this. I could get you an answer. I'll bring it to the transportation department and have somebody go out and evaluate that location, and then we could give you a better concrete answer on exactly where you're referring to.
Yeah, because we really are, have been working closely with the MBTA and our police to make sure, to really prioritize, again, going back to bus operations, as well as ambulance response time. So yeah, if people have specific locations, let us know. We're happy to follow up.
Do you know who specifically from the city will be monitoring things on site day to day?
Yeah, so our Capitol Buildings group we talked about, and again, this is not a typical project. So I, would say, as deputy city manager, will continue to be involved between now through the end of this project at a very high level, making sure that we're being responsive, making sure that we have the right resources dedicated to this team. From our Capitol Buildings group, we have Brendan Roy, who is the director of that group. He has, personally been involved with, a lot of significant construction across the city, both in terms of our, large school projects that we talked about, as well as demolition projects. We also have Monique Oliveira, who is the director of construction within that group, and she's been actively involved in this process. And then now, as we are getting into, being in the field and having, boots on the ground, we will also be pulling in additional staff, including John Lejudicus from that group, who's also been involved in a number of significant projects throughout the city. And I'd say, really has a good handle on, working with the neighborhood, being available to people, answering questions, and addressing some of the, sort of, I don't want to call them, some of the nuisancey kind of stuff that we talked about, and understanding that those really impact the neighborhood. So, early starts, idling vehicles, those kinds of operations. And so we would have all four of us involved at different levels.
The vibration perimeter that we showed earlier didn't seem symmetrical, and somebody's wondering how it is that we got to that. Mainly, they said if it was symmetrical, it would have extended to Dinsmore Court.
Again, it's really about finding properties that are close. And then, if those properties are not experiencing vibrations, then people that are farther out. I know the Bradbury Street units are a little farther away. They are still have the sort of the face closest to the property. And so we have closer properties, again, the closest building on Mount Auburn Street, as well as Spark Streets, which are really going to be the closest locations for those vibration monitors. So I think, 205 Mount Auburn Street, we've talked a lot about, is about 40 feet away from the demolition site. The properties on Spark Street are sort of in the 65 to 75 foot distance away. And so those are absolutely going to be the closest locations to the demolition site.
If workers have to wear full PPE, is that a sign that we should be concerned about exposure? Can you talk a little bit about which zone is wearing the full PPE versus?
Sure. So I think there's a couple different things, and we've talked about, as asbestos controlled zone, and then, these exclusion zones. So the exclusion zones that Jake really went through are about sort of structural exclusion zones. If there was something that was going to, drop from the building, or as they're doing the demolition, they cannot physically have people in those zones, again, unless they're in a protected cab. The asbestos controlled zone will include where the trucks are being loaded, will include anywhere where there could be asbestos exposure, again, for employees. So employees in those zones will be wearing the sort of full PPE for protective. Again, they're sort of at ground zero. But I would say, farther away, you're going to see those folks. And I know that's of concern to people, but again, they are closer in proximity. We are doing monitoring sort of between those zones and where the public is. And so again, that is the critical piece is, they are closer to the work. They're at ground zero. They're also the people that are exposed to these operations, all the time, because this is the work they do. And so the more that we are focused on protecting their health, the more we're protecting everyone's. But at the edges of those asbestos exclusion zones, there will be that sampling of where we're confirming that air quality sampling data.
Have we considered posting the air quality data daily if it's being processed daily?
So one of the things that we're still working a little bit on this, we want to make sure that the data, and again, if something dramatic happens, we would have a different conversation. But in terms of we're regularly going through, we're testing it, it looks good, we're sharing that with DEP, we're sharing that with the public. We want to make sure that data is in a QA, is quality controlled and put into a fashion that people can understand. We also want to make sure that these folks are focused on doing the work. And so we think that sort of a weekly monitoring update, and again, getting into that pattern so people start to see that consistent data. Again, very similarly with what we've done with the drone survey. So we're doing that drone survey, we're having people analyze it, and then doing a summary and posting that on the website. So we'll continue to do that with all of this data that we're getting.
Thank you. In regards to all of the appliances that are still left behind in 221, is there a plan to have those removed prior to the demolition, or will they just come with the rest of the building as we take it down?
Jason, you want to take that one?
I was just coming unmuted because I know Jake's got the details on this one. It's a question that has stuck in our minds since the building was left the way it is, but there is a plan, if I understand it, Jake, that we're going to sort that material out as best we can when it's not destroyed and intermingled with, potential contaminated materials to properly salvage it, designated as white goods.
Correct. So of course we cannot enter the building now due to the state of the structure. However, as we are going through the demolition and the debris, whatever can be sorted, cleaned, and deemed asbestos-free by the on-site hygienist can be removed, packed, recycled as white goods. That, of course, is dictated by a thorough visual inspection and what can be considered decontaminated or not.
And again, I think we talked a little bit about, having a drone, doing some, so that you can see into the site, have an understanding of what's there. So any material that we can remove and dispose of safely as non-asbestos containing material, they will do that. It is their understanding the building is, mostly vacant, but I do understand that most of those appliances were left in place.
Will Bradbury Street be accessible for cars turning around?
Yes, there's no anticipated change to Bradbury Street. So Bradbury Street would remain open and accessible, both in terms of, people coming down Spark Street and needing to turn around for those few vehicles, as well as for the residents of Bradbury Street.
And since we mentioned Mount Auburn would be the trucking route, do we expect any additional parking restrictions to be put in place?
We haven't identified any at this time. If we do, it'd be right in that immediate zone. But, at this time, we're really looking at primarily the zone that we're, have identified today.
Has the consideration of the foundation being floating because of the weight of the building no longer being there been reviewed?
Again, my understanding of the foundation is it's really piles, so it's not a solid foundation. So there's concrete piles. Again, our focus is on removing the building, and sort of, what happens with the foundation after that is a little less critical in terms of not creating a public safety issue. And again, any new building would not use that foundation, right? So a new building would need to be, designed and have new foundations done for it.
We have a few people asking about vibrations that they've experienced due to the buses that have been rerouted, and will these vibration monitors pick up that sort of level, or is there a threshold?
Yeah, so, one of the reasons, and again, we talked a little bit about installing the vibration monitoring, sort of beginning next week. And so we're coordinating directly with those property owners, is we want to have good baseline data so that we understand, what are normal vibrations that people experience in the area, so that we have good baseline data, so then we can really evaluate if there's changes associated with construction.
Thank you. I think we have 5 minutes left, but we still have quite a bit more, so we'll try to get through the
we talked a little bit about, again, just because, we have questions, we'll continue to poke around, do as many as we can now, but also we'll be updating the FAQ. So if there are ones we don't get to, we'll try to consolidate those and respond to as well.
A lot about when Mount Auburn will reopen for pedestrians, and we did answer that one. We'll keep you posted as we go, and as soon as possible we would. A lot of people asking for the exact truck route, and again, we know that they will be coming in and out on Mount Auburn and heading towards Fresh Pond Parkway, and when we get information beyond that, we'll be sure to share it with the list.
Absolutely. And again, we can post it on the website, the FAQs.
Do you know how much asbestos was used during the construction? Was it just around the piping systems, or was it actually between floors and walls for insulation as well?
And we've posted the asbestos reports that we have. So again, because we're not able to go into the building currently because of the structural condition, we can't go in and do a sort of full asbestos analysis. What we do know is that, and again, pretty consistent with what we would expect, in floor tiles and popcorn ceilings, and then that is where we've seen the primary asbestos. But again, because we don't know where the asbestos is, all of that debris would be treated as asbestos containing material. But again, I think about a week or two ago, we posted the report that we had sharing that data about what we know about asbestos in the building from various renovation projects that have been done within individual units.
Thank you. And we did get another request. We'll make sure to include it in the FAQs. People really want more information about the base level of asbestos and what would actually trigger something that would be concerning.
Yeah, and again, I mean, we will absolutely share that. I would say the other thing I just want to reiterate is that, once we have the approved non-traditional work plan from Mass DEP, we will also post that would have the various requirements and levels.
Thank you. We had a question about I think we talked about this in the first presentation, but if you just want to, it's a good one to close on, Kathy. What's the
Sure.
plan for repayment? They're wondering how this works. And I know we touched upon that before, but for anyone that's new here, how does the city recoup their funds?
Sure. So we talked a little bit earlier that, City Council appropriated $20 million to support the demolition of this project. Once we are completed with all of the work, we would tally what that final total is. And then once we have that, we would then send bills to all of the individual unit owners of 221 Mount Auburn Street. And they would be required to pay that. If they do not repay it, we would lien the property. And if and when the property is sold for redevelopment, the city would sort of be first in line to recoup those funds. So again, my heart goes out to all of the residents of 221. We talked a little bit about, they were doing regular maintenance. They were doing all the right things with the building, and it is structurally unsound and needs to be demolished. And they've all lost their homes. And so it is an extremely challenging situation for them. And now a lot of other folks, because of the impacts of the structural constraints with the building and the demolition process that requires. But the owners of 221 Mount Auburn Street are ultimately responsible for the demolition cost. And we would go through a legal process to lien those properties, such that when the property, is sold, that we would be sort of first in line to get repaid.
And then one final thing, Kathy, I think it's just important to talk about that discussions with neighbors have been ongoing. Someone asked if the Spark Street neighbors just found out here live with us about their access, or in the same for the 205 Mount Auburn Street residents. So I think it's important to touch upon the fact that we've had many, many meetings, and we have met in advance of this meeting with both those sets of residents as well as the hospital and others.
Yeah, and I think it's really important, and those conversations will continue. I know that the entire neighborhood is impacted by this disruption, but there are absolutely residents that are much more significantly impacted, and so we have worked really hard to maintain open communications with those folks. We've met within the last week with probably 120 people, to be honest, between keeping the residents of 221 Mount Auburn Street up to date, the residents of 205, the residents on Spark Street, all of those folks that are, the most directly impacted, and really trying to make sure that we're touching base with them. And again, coordinating on a lot of logistics. We're, requiring significant changes in their access, significant changes in their living situation. And so we really wanted to prioritize making sure that we're having those conversations with those folks, not in a meeting with, 300 plus people, but really on a one-on-one basis. And, we continue to make ourselves accessible to those folks. And, throughout this process, I will give a shout out to Kristen, who is, really the front face in terms of any resident concerns or questions. Kristen does an amazing job of, taking in questions and making sure she's getting those back out to the right members of the team to get questions answered. So I think we're getting closer to night. When we started this process, there were a lot of questions we didn't have answers to. There are still some, and we're continuing to work on those, and we'll continue to share those. But again, encourage folks to reach out to Kristen. But to your point, Kristen, yes, we are having a lot of those detailed conversations with residents that, are significantly impacted.
Thank you. And now that we're at the 8 o'clock mark, I just want to remind everyone, please, 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 if you haven't signed up for the email list, you can go to the project page, cambridgema.gov/221 Mount Auburn Street. You can sign up there, and that's where the reports that we mentioned tonight will continuously be uploaded, and as well as this video sometime tomorrow afternoon. Thank you all for joining us and for all of your questions. And if you think of anything once we leave, feel free to reach out.
Thank you all.